Good morning. That's kind of weak. Let's try that again. Good morning. Much better. Much better. Going around the room on the sick and injured, Brother Terry is not feeling too good today. Tina's had a rough week. Brother Charles is out in the lobby back with us, but still having some issues with his breathing. Holly has her pre-op Wednesday. Wednesday, and then scheduled for surgery on the 15th. Amy has got about 10 more days in the hospital. Sister Fuller is still under chemotherapy treatments. Have I missed anybody? Wow. It is, because your email was kind of bleak. Right. Fantastic. Yes, ma'am. Right. Okay. Tommy Roy, that had been in the accident and on life support, they'd pulled the plug on him, and he passed away. Is that it? Oh, yes, I meant to mention that. Emily's checkup went well. The engrafting numbers are up, which is great, and all the other lab work turned out good. So she's in a safe zone right now, as long as she doesn't have something that tears her immune system down, like a pneumonia or flus or things like that. So let's continue to keep her in our prayers. So anyone else? Brother Bobby, would you then lead us in a prayer, please? Amen. Brother Joel, you feel like reading for me, please? Our text we're going to be in Luke chapter 15, but I would like for us to first go to Matthew. I need you to read Matthew 9 and verse 10. Matthew 9 and verse 10. All right, and 5:47, Matthew 5 and verse 47. And then 18, Matthew 18 and verse 17. Okay. Now, the reason I had you read those three sections is when we start in Luke chapter 15 and verse 1, we're going to read verse 1 and 2 and then start putting it together. It says, "Then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners for to hear him, and the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them." In the first place, the publicans and the sinners, by you going back and reading that, particularly chapter 18 and verse 17 in Matthew, it tells us who the publicans were, that they were not looked upon with very much regard. And, because it said, if they don't hear, let them be as that. So publicans also, who else was a publican before he changed? We're in his book, Matthew. Luke was a physician. Matthew was a dreaded tax collector. So the publicans were along the lines of the tax collectors in that group. And then as now, tax collectors are not looked upon with much regard, are they? So, and then the sinners. And then the second part, the other that I had him read was talking about sinners coming to him and him saying that, well, he didn't say it in that verse, but basically Christ is saying the healthy don't need the doctor, the sick need the doctor, so who else should I be eating with if I'm not accepting everybody? We don't exclude anybody, and that's what he's saying right there, because he says once they murmured against him, and why do people murmur and backbite and gossip? Elevate themselves most of the time, tear other people down. I've used the comment before in class that it appears as though sometimes there's people that can't feel good about themselves unless they make others feel bad about themselves. So, but they're always trying to put Christ in a box and trap him and find something that can use against him. And then verse 3 simply says, and he spake a parable. And we all know what parables are. We've gone through that several times. And then the parable starts in verse 4. And I'm only going to read one little phrase, and then we're going to stop and talk before we get to the rest of it. What man of you having 100 sheep? I personally have never been around sheep that much, but I know quite a bit about sheep because of friends, literature I've read, and things of that nature. And it seems like in the Bible, sheep is used quite a bit to try to give you an image of something that's going on. One of my uncles was a hog man. He managed a farm of hogs, so I helped him with hogs. Most people think hogs are dumb, but hogs are smart. On the other hand, what is the most helpless farm animal that you can have around? They can't take care of themselves. Sheep. If a sheep wanders off, he can bleat for the herd, but they can be responding, and the sheep will still go another direction. They have no sense of direction. They don't know how to take care of themselves. So they're the most helpless of all the animals, and I think personally that is one reason that sheep is used so much in Scripture, showing about the helpless. When he talks of 100, we would call that a flock. Now, since it's a parable, a flock of sheep would be compared to what in the religious world? Us, yeah, the people, mankind. And then he says, if he lose one of them, doth not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after him, that which is lost, until he find it. Now, what it sounds like, if you just look at it on the surface, is that he's out there by himself, and he's got 100 sheep, and now he counts 99. So I'm going to just let them go, and I'm going to go find that one. Does that make sense? Not really. But what it says is that he was so interested that he is going to go looking for one. Now, he goes out immediately, and he's going to look for him, and he's going to find it, and he's not going to stop until he finds it. If we compare that to looking for a lost soul, what does it tell us to do? Seek diligently, keep trying. And also something that we'll need to look at here is if an animal wanders off, the longer the animal is gone, the less your chance is of finding it. Correct? And depending on how weak an animal, particularly the sheep, like I say, they've got no sense of direction, no head for home or anything like that. Now, when I used to hunt a bunch, if we couldn't round up a dog when we was out hunting, we would throw down a shirt or our jacket or something and go back the next day, and more times than not, the dog would be laying on the shirt waiting on us to come back. Sheep don't do that. You got to go find them. They can't come to you. But the sooner you go looking for it, the more likely you are to find it. If you put that in a spiritual sense, if someone misses a service in the church, a lot of times we just sit around and we don't think much of it. Well, they've got their reasons. We don't call, we don't check on them. They miss 2, might call them, might find out what's going on. 3, 4. The longer a person is absent from service, the harder it is for them to come back on their own. And it's also harder for you to make a connection when you're trying to talk to them and get them back. Now, again, there are some situations like sickness and all where this does not apply because their heart is still, when I had my busted foot and couldn't be here, every time Andrea came to service, my heart was still here. That don't apply. I'm talking about people just drifting off. So we got to keep things in balance when we start talking about this stuff. Questions? Yes, Brother Joel. Absolutely. What Joel said, if you couldn't hear back there, was that Christ places so much value on each soul that he goes looking for the one lost. He wants the one lost to be there. Any other questions or comments through verse 4? Verse 5, when he found it, he left it on his shoulders, rejoicing, and when he cometh home, he calleth together his friends and neighbors, saying unto them, Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. I'm not going to wait till we get there. Skip down to verse 10. Skip down to verse 10. Likewise, I say unto you, there is joy in the presence of the angel of God over one sinner that repenteth. This goes along exactly with what Brother Joel just said. With everything that God has on his plate, if we want to try to simplify things, with everything that God's got going and everything the angels have going and all the people that are saved and he's got on the book of life, one sinner and they rejoice. Does that not tell you what Joel said, how much value is placed on each of us? Back up to verse 7 now. I say unto you that likewise joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, which we just read, more than the 99 just persons which need no repentance. Now, does that say that he places more value on the one that was found and brought back than the 99? What's it telling us? The joy of having one back. The 99 are secure. Now this one is secure. So it's just a comparison. It does not mean that he places more value on the one than the other, but it's just, like I say, you got to keep things in balance. Any other questions or comments to this point? Yes, sir. Right. What Brother Terry said was he's at this point addressing the Pharisees, because he's telling them the parable, the publican, sinners, Pharisees, and even though they don't recognize it, they are in this situation. They are the ones lost because they are not doing things the way they're supposed to. Verse 8, we switch gears. We go to a different parable. Either what woman having 10 pieces of silver, if she lose one piece, doth not light a candle and sweep the house and seek diligently till she find it? When I was reading this and thinking about it, I'm sitting there thinking about our world today. And I have seen this happen. Now, let me start this way with it. I'm not a penny pincher. But if I walk up and I see a penny on the ground, I'm going to stop and pick it up. There are some people who say it's not worth it and walk on by it. So we got to look at what is 10 pieces of silver here. Depending on which source you go to, a piece of silver was either a day's wage or the equivalent of 15 cents. And that was back when the King James Bible was translated 400 years ago. So that 15 cents would be worth about 3 or 4 cents today. However, the importance is, let's just say it's a day's wage, and she had 10 of them. Money to people mean different things. There are some people that a nickel is a lot of money to them. And then you have people who are independently wealthy. I think throw $100 bills around and it not mean anything to them. But the point is that this woman here, she loses something that's of value, and she's going to go looking for it. Now, I have lost things of value. I'm a tinkerer. I've worked on a lot of things. At one point, I worked on rod and reels for a living. If you've ever taken a reel apart, those little old springs, they can go anywhere. I now make pens. If you lose a spring out of a ballpoint pen, I have taken a flashlight and gotten down on the floor, and if you take the flashlight and sweep it across, you can see shadows of things that are sticking up above. And it also illuminates a lot better than natural light most of the time. So I have gone looking for those things. But here, this woman, she misplaces or loses a piece of silver, and now she goes to diligently seek it. And when she found it, she called her friends and her neighbors together, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I lost." Now, I didn't rejoice when I found the piece that I had dropped on the floor. I just went back to my work and finished my work. Brother Doug, though, I think, I've not talked to him about this, but he and I also tinker with weapons. And I will say from my past experience, even though I lay everything out, I get my table ready, I have dropped small screws. And when I can't find one, it drives me crazy. Brother Doug nodding his head. Because, yeah, you can go buy another one. Yeah, you can, but it's just that I need it. I want it. I sort of compare that to this woman. Bobby, you laughing, you've done similar things, right? But here, like I say, you don't rejoice, but you're happy when you do find it, because now you can continue your work and get things done. And then as we read in verse 10, the rejoicing that takes place in heaven. Any questions or comments on these two parables? Brother Golan. Right. Okay. Good point. Good point. Yes, ma'am. Up. Okay. Okay. If you didn't hear that over here, she said that in lessons that she had heard previously on this, it was that the coin could be equated to somebody that who had not yet heard, that it wasn't their fault they were lost, but they hadn't just been reached yet, which is similar to what Brother Golden had, the comment that he had made on it. That sometimes uh, members of the church can inadvertently cause people to stray. And one of the examples he used was new converts. Uh, and I have to agree with him on that point, because so many times when we get a person and study with them and get them to understand, and then they are baptized, we just automatically accept them. And it's like, hey, you're one of us now. And we don't take any extra care to continue study with them or to help them grow. And so they stray away because they don't yet have the strong roots. They don't have the foundation. They've got the basic knowledge, but they need the assistance to keep building on it. Yes. Good points, all good points. Anything else? Okay, we're going to switch to another, and this next one is one of Andrea's favorites. Certain man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me, and he divideth unto them his living. In some countries today, they do things a little bit differently than we do in the United States. And back in this time, things were different. Today, we would not expect a child to come to a parent and ask for their inheritance. That would be totally inappropriate, right? There are a lot of parents, though, who, when they feel like they're getting old, will go ahead and start dividing things out and giving them their, what we refer to as their inheritance, before they go, to make sure that everything gets in the right hands. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. Other countries, and back then, it was customary that when a child became of age, if they had an inheritance coming, they could ask for it legally, morally, and get it so they could go out and go on their own. So I take it to be that this situation was taking place, that it wasn't that the kid was a renegade or an outcast. He was just saying, okay, I'm of age now, I want to go start my own life. And apparently his father was a farmer of some type, as we'll find out later. And maybe this kid just didn't like farming. I knew when I was growing up, the last thing I wanted to go back to was the garden. Now I wish I remembered half of what I had forgotten about gardening. But I take it to be that situation, that there's no animosity or anything, that the kid's just gotten of age, wants his share so he can go start a life. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. Uh, could be that part of it had to do with part of his inheritance could have been animals, part of it could have been land, part of it could have been money. But apparently here that it says not many days after, uh, if he had gotten material things, it looks like he sold it, because when he left to go a long way off, all he had was money. Now, if you'll skip down to verse 30, it will tell us what righteous living is. Go ahead and read verse 30. Yeah. Because the section I wanted you to pick up on was that as soon as thy son was come, which had devoured thy living with harlots. So that's the section there that tells us part of what righteous living is. Now, today it's not such a big deal as it was when I was a youngster. When I was young, and many of you in here were young, the only thing we knew was right here. We had sort of lived a sheltered life, so to speak. When I went in the Air Force, and well, when I went to college first, but that was still a very sheltered existence because I went to a Christian school. And they locked the door on the girls at 10 o'clock at night, and you couldn't see them again till 6 o'clock. I mean, they had everything locked down. So we were sort of sheltered. So when I went in the Air Force in 1969, that was my first real away from home, no controls on me. I'm on my own now. I can do anything I want to. It was a whole different world than what I'd been used to, because I was going to have to be the one to do everything. Today, the way mobility is, people have cars and kids and everything. They can go anywhere and do anything. It's not that shock that it used to be. I think, to give you a good example, is in World War I, if you can take yourself back to the early 1900s, the people that lived in the early 1900s, what kind of existence did they live? Most of them were farmers, right? And they were tied to that. Most of them had probably never been out of the county in which they were born. Now, do you know what took most people out of action in World War I? It was not gunshot wounds. You were shaking your head. What was it? Social disease. Why was social disease the thing that took most of the military out of action in World War I? They're on this farm. Now they're in the big city. Totally different lifestyles. I can sort of equate that to what's happening here. This kid was raised on the farm. He didn't like the farm. I want to go live my life. I'm going to go a long way off. And it would be like taking somebody here from the Bible Belt that went to a Christian school, and all of a sudden you turn them loose in Las Vegas, Nevada, or San Francisco, or something on their own. That's how I sort of put this, that this kid went out there. Now, we're going to get down a little bit later when he goes through all his money, he has no friends. Do you think he has friends when he's got money and he's wasting all his money? Not really. Not real friends, but he has people who they are very interested in him. It reminds me of a movie. Any of you see the movie Sergeant York? One of my favorite war movies. What happens when he kills the calf and gets his money, and then the farmer had reneged on the deal, and he goes off to get drunk? What happens? two of his buddies over there, or two of his friends, they see him walking off and, come on, let's go, let's go. They run right with him because what? He's got the money to get them what they want. So it happens a lot in the world today that people hang around people for selfish reasons. And once the money is gone, then what happens? He spent all his money having a good time. He had all these people maybe around him having a good time. When he runs out, nobody comes to his assistance. Verse 14, and when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine. So it's not just that he runs out of money, now that there's a issue that happens in the land also. And he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. I fed a lot of swine in my day. Didn't bother me. Eating my fair share of them too. Didn't bother me. I'm a Christian. What is a swine to a Jew? The lowest of the low. And here he is, gone out to feed the swine. Yeah, to be that, you even have to be lower than what you're serving, right? So he's lower than the low. Since you mentioned that, in that culture and even over in Egypt, they would not allow pig farmers, those that took care of the pigs, to mix with any. They couldn't marry, they couldn't go to certain things. They were sort of the outcast group. So here he just placed himself from, and I guess you really have to think about it this way. And I look at it as a Christian. A Christian is in good standing with God. Then they turn. They're lost. They die. They go to heaven, get sent someplace else, but they're singing, look what I had. Now look what I have. I had all this that I threw away. Don't you think that's what he's thinking? That it says a little bit later that he's looking back at his daddy's farm. Hey, I used to not worry about eating. I used to not worry about clothes. Now look what I am. Because it says here that he would fain have filled his belly with the husk that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. Now, I don't really believe that they're talking about the husk as we look at husk today. What do we think of as husk today? Yeah, outer shucking of the corn and all. Here it was barleys and wheats and things like this. But if somebody is desiring the food that is being given to the pig, what is that telling you about what they're actually getting? This man he was working for apparently was giving him next to nothing. Couldn't even exist on it. He is so hungry that he's willing to eat what the pigs eat. So as Brother Cox said, now he is really down on the low end of things, right? Questions, comments?
when I was back at home as a kid, I had all that support. But one good thing for me, but I went back home, go out to the play. And that really, in my walk in my life, really tore me down because I did not have so much support. I did not have that wisdom turn to you, right? Something I made for it. Then as I got older, just like this then, I realized, really back there was not all that bad. Just that my perception of it was wrong. And that's what really brought me back to where I am.
Yeah. Well, similar to what I was talking about, when I was growing up at home, my friends, when they invited me to go someplace, it was someplace that was okay to go. The first invite I had once we got through basic training and could be out free, it was places Christians shouldn't go. So you've got a whole different thing pulling at you there. So yeah. I've been hungry before, but I don't think I've ever been hungry enough to eat what the pigs eat. So verse 17 says, when he came to himself, he said. Now, what does it mean by he came to himself? Light came on, he realized. Now, we don't know the age of this individual. It just says the son. But he was old enough to be legal to do these things. And I know that years ago, people matured a whole lot faster than they do today. Back in the early 1900s, for instance, kids 13, 14 years old was getting married and setting up farm keeping, setting up their own. Today, however, scientists tell us that a person does not, that the last thing to develop mentally in a person today is consequences for action. And that doesn't take place until they're about 25. And some folks it never do. I agree with you. But on the, I'm not even going to say normal, on the, and not going to say average. The mean is that it's about 25 years of age that a person is fully developed into the realizing action for consequences. So we might put this fellow in this category that he was, he knew what he wanted, but he didn't know it. Like Bobby and I have been talking about, he couldn't appreciate what he had. And now all of a sudden, he realizes, he comes to that realization of consequences for action. Look what I did. Look where I am. Look what I gave up. Look what I could have had. And he asked the question, how many hired servants of my father have bread enough to eat and to spare, and I perish with hunger? So he, at this point, realizes that not just he had it better back home, but even the hired help, the servants at home, had it better than he's got it now. And it goes again to point out that the fellow that he had joined himself to was not even providing for him. Historically, if you look around the time when immigration was taking place coming from Europe to America, America was very young. There was a lot of people who didn't have anything, and they would indenture themselves to, well, they'd start out with the captain of the boat. The captain of the boat would buy them or set them up to get to the States, and then he would get his money back and indenture a person, and they would serve 7 years, which takes us back into the Old Testament about serving for a period of time to get something. And at the end of that 7 years, they were not only supposed to be free, but they were supposed to be given what we would refer to as a grub stake, an animal and some land, so that now they're on their own. But this guy wasn't even getting that much. he wasn't even getting enough to take care of his daily needs, much less when he had served a little time, be able to get out on his own. Yeah, Brother Joel. I not heard one like that, but what Brother Joel said, your friends will carry you, but they won't bring you back, which is. Yeah, now you're on your own. So if we get down to this part, and then verse 18 says, I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee. We're going to stop at this verse. Luke got up, and I think this is a good transition place because the rest of it deals with his getting back and the forgiveness that's going to take place. But right here, it just goes into, he realized that he not only had done his family wrong, but by all this righteous living, he had sinned in the eyes of God. So he was ready to completely turn his life around and do differently than he had done. If we compare that to people coming to Christ in the church, some do it at an early age. They don't have those wild oats to sow, so to speak. Some have never been exposed to it until later life. But there is no age limit here. And once you realize what is going on, you can turn your life around. And he was about to do that at this moment. Brother Terry, and then well, and historically, the older brother got double the portion. But he chose to stay home, and we're just going to get into that, or I'll let you get into that in Wednesday night about how his actions not only affected what he did, but affected his brother. And we really see that when he goes back home and his brother's attitude. Yes. I don't, but I can take it back to, well, I don't either, but I can take it back to my life growing up out in the country when I was 8 or 9 years old. I could go out hunting by myself. I knew consequences for action. I knew the difference between shooting at an animal and shooting at a person. Today, because of the videos and other things, there are 20 and 30 years old that have no concept of reality versus fiction. To me, that's one of the reasons why there's so much crime today. All these drive-by shootings and all the other stuff, as they can't separate what they see on TV from real life. I didn't have to be told 3 times the stove was hot. I didn't have to be told. When I was 6 years old, it was my job to take the double bit axe out and chop the kindling. How many 6-year-olds would you turn loose with any kind of axe today? And if the federal government drove by and saw you, you'd be in jail. I give them a lot of credit, and also my grandparents that lived with us I give them credit because they didn't let me get into mischief. I paid the price for not behaving at an early age. They didn't abuse me, but they taught me lessons. Thank y'all so much for your questions and comments.